Hey everyone, tonight's topic uncovers a disturbing truth about history, the way women's emotions, fears, and mental health were misunderstood, misdiagnosed, and even penalized. From ancient medicine to Victorian asylums, from so-called hysteria to harmful treatments, we'll travel through centuries of bizarre and heartbreaking practices once considered completely normal. Before we dive in, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Only if you genuinely appreciate the content. And in the comments, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's always interesting to see where everyone's tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for a little ambient hum, and let's settle in for tonight's exploration. Our journey begins in ancient Greece, a land of philosophers, mythology, and some oddly specific medical theories. Imagine being a woman in 400 BCE. For weeks you felt unwell. Your chest is tight, your heart races without cause, and waves of panic wash over you. You explain this to a local healer, and after some thoughtful chin-stroking, he concludes, "You're suffering from a wandering womb." Yes, that's right. Hippocrates, the same figure behind the Hippocratic Oath, believed a woman's uterus had a mind of its own. If she became too emotional, anxious, or remained celibate for too long, her womb might decide to travel around the body, up to the chest, down to the legs, wherever it pleased. The resulting dizziness, breathlessness, and trembling were blamed on this free-roaming organ. The treatment? Not rest or tea, but waving sweet-smelling herbs near the pelvis and unpleasant odors at the nose, hoping to coax the womb back into place. Picture lying there as someone wafts burning garlic under your nose, like they're performing a séance for your reproductive system. Very scientific. In a society where women couldn't vote, own property, or even wear pants, this theory was the dominant explanation for female emotional distress. Anxiety wasn't seen as psychological or emotional. It was attributed to unruly reproductive organs. To be fair, the Greeks lacked brain imaging, an understanding of serotonin, or trauma-informed care. But still, blaming it all on the uterus is like diagnosing a car problem and blaming the cup holder. Women of the time felt deep grief, fear, and uncertainty. But rather than being asked how they felt, they were handed incense and told their womb had shifted. Thus began not only the misunderstanding of symptoms, but the silencing of women's inner experiences. Next, we move into ancient Rome. Civilization was advancing, plumbing was sophisticated, but empathy was still developing. A Roman woman experiencing anxiety couldn't call a therapist or reach out to a support line. Instead, she was told to marry or bear children, quickly. Medical experts, almost all male, believed that emotional distress stemmed from an underworked uterus. They didn't call it anxiety, they called it furor uterinus, which sounds like a Roman military tactic, but referred to what they saw as female emotional instability. If a woman cried too often, spoke out of turn, or appeared unsettled, she might be deemed deficient in her feminine role. The solution? Childbirth. Again and again. One physician, Serranus, who authored a gynecological text, advised women to avoid strong emotions entirely. Just stop feeling. Simple enough, right? He also told husbands to be gentle, which in Roman terms probably just meant no shouting at dinner. If you were a wealthy Roman woman with anxiety, you might be prescribed wine and music. That might not sound so bad until you remember the diagnosis still blamed your malfunctioning womb. Poorer women faced more direct responses, herbal potions, spiritual rituals, or complete neglect, and heaven forbid you cried too long after. A miscarriage or challenged your husband, you might be labeled unstable or accused of being possessed. Because nothing says support like a priest shaking chicken bones while you sob. Rome gave us roads, laws, and architecture. But for anxious women it gave only shame, medicalized, moralized, and minimized. No one asked what they were feeling. They only asked when the next child would arrive. Let's move quietly into the Middle Ages, a time of nights, plagues, and very little progress in women's health. Anxiety was no longer just misunderstood, it was feared. The Greek idea of the wandering womb persisted, now blended with religious panic. If a woman trembled, cried, or experienced panic, she wasn't seen as ill, she was seen as spiritually compromised. The church controlled healing practices, often involving exorcisms, public shaming, or, at worst, execution. A woman who said she heard voices or behaved unusually might be accused of witchcraft. Using herbs, knowing astrology, or even crying too much could be considered signs of the devil's influence. Monasteries and infirmaries offered some care, with nuns providing what they could. But without real psychological insight, treatment meant prayer, isolation, and fasting, because nothing calms the soul quite like hunger and silence. Diagnostic techniques were equally primitive. If a woman fainted or trembled, a cross might be pressed to her forehead to test for evil. If she flinched, well, goodbye goats and prepare for the torch. It's tragic. These women weren't witches or sinners. They were suffering, grieving, overwhelmed. But in a culture ruled by fear, a trembling woman was considered dangerous, and dangers were eliminated, not understood. Now we step into the Renaissance, a time of beauty, rebirth, and artistic brilliance. Everything was evolving except compassion for women's mental health. Michelangelo carved masterpieces, and Da Vinci envisioned flying machines. But doctors were still confused by female emotion and still blaming the uterus. Ancient ideas were reintroduced, but with no real improvement in understanding. Women were still told their emotions stemmed from being too feminine. If you were anxious, it meant you needed to marry. If depressed, time for a leech. Treatments included cupping, bleeding, or applying hot substances to the abdomen. The goal: restore balance by draining the body until the soul quieted or the woman passed out. Other remedies included being locked in a dark room or discouraged from reading because too much thinking was believed to destabilize the womb. Wealthy women might be sent to the countryside for rest, but it usually meant being monitored, silenced, and medicated until they seemed better. The Renaissance celebrated symmetry and elegance, but it had no place for a woman who cried too much or couldn't sleep. Emotional pain in women was labeled messy, disruptive, inconvenient, so it was hidden, draped in fabric, locked away, or dismissed. Women with anxiety were left to wonder if the fault lay within them, not in society, not in grief, not in the silence, but in themselves. Because even in the age of reason and light, a woman's fear was still viewed as a flaw to be concealed, not a wound worthy of compassion. Now we enter the 18th and 19th centuries, the Enlightenment and the Victorian era. Rational thought was on the rise. Science was blooming. Electricity, chemistry, early psychology, all of it promised progress. But somehow women's mental health still got stuck in the same dusty drawer labeled hysteria. That word, hysteria, comes from the Greek hystera, meaning uterus. So despite all this rationality, doctors still believed that a woman's anxiety was a reproductive issue. The modern mind might think, maybe she's overwhelmed by societal pressure, family expectations, lack of rights, or the crushing weight of her own invisibility. But no, the problem, they insisted, was her uterus again, still wandering, still misbehaving. 2,000 years later, and it's still the uterus stealing the spotlight. Symptoms of hysteria included everything from nervousness to fainting, insomnia to sexual desire, depression to irritability. In short, any emotion a woman showed that made men uncomfortable. If you cried too much, hysteria. If you didn't cry enough, hysteria. If you were tired, restless, scared, smart, outspoken, too quiet, or just breathing wrong, congratulations, you were hysterical. The treatments ranged from the absurd to the grotesque. There were rest cures, where women were confined to bed. For weeks, not allowed to read, write, or even converse too much, just lie still day after day, like a ghost in her own home. There were cold baths, electrotherapy, and forced feedings. Some doctors prescribed marriage again, or more children, or the infamous pelvic massage administered by physicians, which eventually led to the invention of the vibrator. But that's a strange little footnote for another night. Wealthier women were sent to rest homes or sanitariums. These were often more like luxurious prisons. You could have lace curtains and a nurse in white gloves, but still no freedom, no voice, no validation. Just silence, and maybe a bell to ring when the sadness got too loud. Lower-class women didn't fare better. They were institutionalized, locked away in asylums with minimal care and no privacy. In some of these places, the treatment for anxiety included restraints, isolation, or even surgical removal of the ovaries. If a woman wept too long after a child's death, refused her husband, or seemed too sensitive, she might find herself behind iron gates for the rest of her life. And here's the hardest part. Many of them weren't mad at all. They were grieving or exhausted or terrified, but their emotions didn't fit the narrow mold of Victorian femininity. Quiet, composed, compliant. And so they were erased, labeled, forgotten. Through all this, society kept asking the wrong questions. Instead of, what happened to her? They asked, what's wrong with her? Instead of, how can we help? They asked, how can we stop this? The pain of these women didn't disappear. It just changed shape. It was inherited, passed down, silenced in mothers, hidden in daughters, misunderstood in wives. The shadows of these centuries still linger in how we talk about women's pain, in how quickly we dismiss emotion as overreaction, in how hard it is sometimes for women to say, I'm not okay. But there is a power in remembering, in speaking, in naming the things that were buried. That's why this series exists, not to shame the past, but to understand it. Because when you trace the long road of misdiagnosis, dismissal, and silence, you begin to see why so many still struggle to be heard. Next time, we'll enter the 20th century, a time of psychiatry, Freudian theories, electroshock therapy, and padded walls. We'll explore how modern medicine tried to help but sometimes hurt, and how the echoes of hysteria still whisper today. Until then, be gentle with yourself, especially if your emotions feel like too much. They're not too much. They're information. You're not hysterical. You're human, but actual diagnostic terms, generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, PTSD, finally medical vocabulary that didn't blame the womb. Progress, sort of. Psychiatry was becoming more precise. The DSM, the Manual of Mental Health Diagnoses, was expanding, and insurance began covering treatments. Yet for women with anxiety, old echoes of doubt, dismissal, and stigma remained. Imagine it's 1993, and you're a woman experiencing panic attacks. You visit a doctor, heart racing, sweating, afraid you're dying. He gives you a pamphlet, prescribes Xanax, and politely suggests rest. At least your uterus isn't to blame anymore. Now your lifestyle is the culprit. You're working too hard, overwhelmed. Maybe try jogging. Therapy exists if you can afford it, but finding a therapist who won't dismiss your anxiety as emotional is tough. Cry in session? You're fragile. Don't cry? You're in denial. Either way, your diagnosis comes with a caveat. Still, having a diagnosis is like seeing yourself in a mirror after years of darkness. It's not weakness or personal failure. It's real, and it was always there. SSRIs like Prozac and Zoloft became household names, marketed as modern solutions. They helped many, yet often arrived without exploring trauma history or generational patterns. Just take this, feel better. So yes, progress was clinical, not compassionate. Structured, not sensitive. Labels appeared, but loneliness persisted. The silent question lingered. Will anyone ask why I'm afraid? Then came the 2000s, flip phones, low-rise jeans, and a shift in conversation. For the first time in centuries, people asked not just, "What's wrong with you?" but "What happened to you?" It was a quiet revolution through TED Talks, memoirs, and changing clinical conversations. Researchers, therapists, and survivors began connecting long-ignored dots. Anxiety wasn't only a chemical imbalance, it was sometimes a normal response to a harsh life. 3 words emerged: trauma-informed care. Instead of treating anxiety as a defect, this approach asked, what shaped your nervous system? What patterns is your body trying to survive? What if hypervigilance is learned, not irrational? This thought wasn't abstract, it was personal, especially for women. Anxiety could be traced to abuse, neglect, generational pressure, workplace harassment, the emotional strain of maintaining perfection. For many, this brought relief and validation. Fear wasn't a flaw, it was a wound, and wounds can heal. But this wasn't a magic cure. Society still valued productivity over peace. Women were expected to be calm, capable, composed, while juggling households, careers, children, and mental health trends. Terms like burnout, imposter syndrome, and high-functioning anxiety felt new but familiar. Therapy became more accessible, yet still expensive and inconsistent. One therapist might hold space, another might offer advice and an awkward smile. Social media helped build solidarity, but also trivialized trauma with suggestions like drink more water, ignoring systemic roots. Still, something shifted. The world began understanding what women always knew. Anxiety isn't weakness, it's history whispering through the body, waiting to be heard. We're now in the digital era. Wi-Fi, wellness influencers, phones that never let you rest. Anxiety no longer requires a doctor's diagnosis, just a screen. You wake to 37 notifications, 4 emails, 2 calendar alerts, and a message from someone wanting to pick your brain. Before coffee, your pulse is racing. Digital anxiety is constant and interactive. You're expected to be available, responsive, successful, hydrated, emotionally balanced, glowing, all while curating a smile. The modern woman manages not just her life, but her brand. Anxiety has become both aesthetic and red flag. Posts reading, "My anxiety is bad today," can trend, if filtered right and framed as self-aware, not too messy. Vulnerability sells, but only if digestible. Unplug, you'll be punished by algorithms as emails pile up. Meditation becomes performance, tracked, and graded by apps and smartwatches. Anxiety is everywhere, and so is advice. Scroll for reels promising to cure your nervous system in 30 seconds. Breathwork, matcha, journaling, tapping, all useful until they become another checkbox in your overfilled day. Through it all, women face the same pressure: to be liked, successful, informed, responsive, healthy, ethical, thin, kind, efficient, creative, funny, but not too funny. And remember to respond to your boss, friend, and mom group. No wonder your chest tightens. In an age of perpetual connection, rest feels radical, silence suspicious, peace a full-time job. Yet here's the quiet truth. Anxiety isn't a glitch. It's a signal that your nervous system wasn't built for this noise. After centuries of silencing, shaming, scrolling women into exhaustion, something unexpected is happening. Women are slowing down, not because the world eased, but because they realize chasing impossible standards leads only to burnout and existential dread. Today, in quiet corners of the internet, living rooms, yoga studios, therapy circles, a soft revolution is unfolding. It's not loud, viral, or athleisure matched. It just rests. Rest as resistance, rest as reclaiming, rest as the ancient. Sacred medicine women were denied. Not the forced kind, prescribed by Victorian doctors, but the chosen kind, the kind that says, I don't owe anyone my exhaustion. Women are learning to say no, not as failure but as boundary. They cancel plans, log off, let dishes wait, and shockingly, the world keeps spinning. Guilt may whisper, "You should do more." But another voice whispers back, "You've done enough for today. Breathe." Communities form, women holding space for each other without judgment, saying "me too" instead of "why can't you push through?" They rewrite the narrative one exhale at a time. Healing isn't linear. Some days you meditate, journal, walk. Other days you cry into your cereal and delete your calendar. Both are okay. Maybe anxiety doesn't mean you're broken. Maybe it means you're awake in a world that tries to numb you. So tonight, if your mind races or your heart weighs heavy, remember, you are not a machine. You were never meant to be. And in a culture that worships hustle, choosing true rest is not weakness. It's wisdom, ancient, sacred, revolutionary. Long before selfies or regrettable trends, people got tattooed. The earliest known tattoos belong not to teens or battle-weathered warriors, but to Ötzi the Iceman. Discovered in the Alps in 1991, he's over 5,000 years old, with 61 simple black lines and crosses etched along joints, spine and ankles. Not dragons or skulls, just lines. Researchers believe these may have been early acupuncture or pain relief, ink as survival, medicine in soot and bone. Across ancient Egypt, mummies, mostly women, bear intricate dot patterns believed to symbolize fertility or devotion to the goddess Hathor. Again, these weren't ornamental. They were spiritual armor worn into the afterlife. In Siberia, tattooed Scythian nobles were buried with mythical animals etched across their arms and torsos. Tattoos marked warriors, signaled rank, and served as passage passports. These weren't the first humans to tattoo themselves, just the first we've found. Tattoo history didn't begin with pop culture. It began with ritual, pain, intention. Tattoos were medicine, memory, protection, ink as reverence. They told stories before books existed. To understand tattoo's soul, we traveled to Polynesia. In Samoa, Tonga, Tahiti, tattoos weren't whimsical. They were sacred, earned, lifelong. The word tattoo comes from Polynesian tatau, the sound of tapping bone tools into skin. This wasn't a machine, it was rhythm. Tatau marked rites of passage, painful, meaningful. A young Samoan man lies on mats for days or weeks, while the tufuga taps geometric patterns into his body. These early tattoos were more than decoration. They were enduring symbols of identity, culture, and survival. And soot. The design would extend from the waist to the knees, a rite of passage symbolizing adulthood, identity, and courage. The pain wasn't accidental, it was integral to the ritual. Enduring it proved one's readiness. Quitting midway brought shame upon both individual and family. In Tahiti, tattoos signified genealogy and status. They could mark divine protection, spiritual bonds, or sexual maturity. Women inked their fingers when they were ready to marry. Men covered their chests to denote warrior lineage. Every dot, line, and curve held sacred meaning. Today, in many Polynesian communities, tattoos continue to carry this significance. They're more than self-expression. They link individuals to ancestry, living records written on skin. When Europeans arrived in the Pacific during the 18th century, they were both intrigued and appalled. Sailors, such as those accompanying Captain Cook, documented the practice in their journals. Some crew members adopted tattoos, not to honor the ritual, but as souvenirs of their travels, a trend devoid of meaning, yet inky nonetheless. Despite this shift, tattooing remained a Polynesian tradition rooted in sanctity and pride. Proof that one's life story was worth enduring pain and permanent enough to mark the skin. Moving east, the history of tattooing becomes more complex, at once beautiful and punitive, honorable and shameful. In ancient China, tattoos carried heavy stigma. Instead of symbols of spirituality or strength, they often marked criminals. Faces or necks were permanently inked with words like thief or traitor, branding them for life, a physical reminder of disgrace. This practice, known as chape, was a lifelong punishment, an exile worn on skin. Yet even here, tattoos held deeper meaning. Some Chinese warriors voluntarily inked themselves to demonstrate loyalty or devotion. In the classic novel Water Margin, one of the 108 outlaws is said to be covered in tattoos of dragons, tigers, and flames, his honor etched upon his flesh like scripture. In Japan, the story of tattoos was even more layered. Early Japanese tattoos, called irizumi, were believed to ward off evil spirits, protect fishermen, or signal status. But like in China, tattoos served as punishment for criminals, marked with lines on the arms or forehead, each stroke noting a crime. By the Edo period, 1600s, 1800s, full-body tattoos emerged underground as an art form. Elaborate depictions of dragons, koi, gods and demons stretched across the backs, arms and legs of ordinary people, firefighters, laborers, gamblers, men with dangerous work and reputations. The Yakuza later adopted full-body irizumi to signal strength, loyalty and fearlessness. The greater the coverage, the greater the respect and the more pain endured. Hidden beneath clothing, these tattoos were private emblems revealed rarely, in bathhouses or battles. In both China and Japan, tattoos straddled two worlds, art and punishment, identity and exile, pride and shame. Because sometimes the ink that marks you also defines you. In ancient Europe, tattoos walked a narrow path between power and punishment, depending on the bearer of the needle and the bearer of the mark. Consider the Celts and Picts in Britain and Scotland. Roman soldiers were shocked. These warriors, often nude or cloaked in wolf hides, displayed striking blue spirals and knots across their bodies. The plant-based dye stained their skin deep. Like storm clouds, these tattoos were not decorative. They were armor, intimidation, identity. Tattooing announced readiness for battle. Julius Caesar described them with a mix of awe and horror as wild and barbaric. Rome itself used tattoos to control. Criminals, slaves, and prisoners of war were branded with ownership or shame. A runaway slave might receive FVG fugitivis on their skin. A deserter could be inked with disgrace. Even early Roman Christians were sometimes tattooed as enemies of the state or heretics. These tattoos were burdens, not badges. At the same time, some Roman soldiers, especially in eastern provinces, voluntarily inked symbols of loyalty or religious devotion, quiet rebellions beneath their armor. As Christianity spread through Europe, tattoos were increasingly denounced, seen as pagan, sinful, barbaric. The body was considered a temple, and temples were not to be painted. Yet whispers of old customs persisted, passed down secretly, mother to daughter, warrior to warrior. Tattoos were tribal proof of belonging to land, people, and gods. In the Middle Ages, tattooing receded but never disappeared. The Christian Church condemned it as pagan and suspect, yet it persisted among pilgrims. Those who journeyed to Jerusalem often returned with small crosses tattooed on wrists or forearms, marks of survival, faith, and devotion, often inked by Coptic Christians. Some monks even used tattoos to identify their order. Rumors abound of Crusader knights tattooing relics or sacred words onto their bodies before battle, so that if they died far from home, their bodies would bear divine symbols. In villages and countryside, folk traditions also endured. Protective symbols for childbirth, sacred patterns against wolves. These were prayers in pigment, not mere decoration. But in medieval Europe, tattooing remained a paradox, both forbidden and revered, sacred and shameful. It was quiet, discreet, a subtle assertion of faith, defiance, and identity in a world that forbade it. Then, in the 16th and 17th centuries, as European ships reached distant shores, tattoos resurfaced in Western society, but this time through saltwater and superstition. Explorers like Captain Cook encountered cultures where tattooing was sacred. His sailors, captivated by exotic designs, began getting inked, a symbol of danger, rebellion, and adventure. From ports to parlors in cities like New York, London, and Lisbon, tattoo culture spread. Former sailors began tattooing others in smoky rooms, using homemade needles and soot. For those who braved drowning, disease, and mutiny, the pain of permanent ink was a small trade-off for memory. Tattoos became keepsakes, confessions, maps of personal history, proof that one's story would not fade with time. By the late 19th century, tattoos shed their outlaw image. In 1891, New York tattooist Samuel O'Reilly patented the first electric tattoo machine, modeled after Edison's electric pen, making tattoos faster, more precise, less bloody, more art, less surgery. A new era dawned. Tattoos became performance. Circus sideshows and dime museums featured tattooed individuals as curiosities. Captain George Constantini, the tattooed Greek prince, and Nora Hildebrandt, one of America's first tattooed women, her body inked and her story eloquently dramatized. These performers were living exhibitions, their bodies challenging Victorian norms. Despite lingering taboo, the elite discreetly embraced ink. King Edward VII and his son, the future George V, are said to have had tattoos, a Jerusalem cross and a Japanese dragon, respectively. Aristocrats in Europe and America explored body art privately and quietly. By now, tattoo parlors had spread beyond ports to urban centers, small studios nestled among barbershops and billiard halls. Tattoos had come full circle. From sacred tradition to stigma, from criminal marking to artistic expression and performance, an enduring testament to humanity's desire to leave an indelible mark. And while the art world was still dominated by men, women began stepping into the craft, needle in hand. Tattoos were no longer just a symbol of rebellion. They were becoming a way to preserve memories, express identity, or simply enjoy something deeply personal that couldn't be taken away. As the 20th century pushed ahead with towering buildings, revolutions, and wars, tattooing quietly evolved, but often out of sight. Inside prison walls, in locked cells and concrete yards, a new tattoo language was forming, not written on paper, but etched into skin. These weren't refined studio pieces. They were rough, improvised, made with smuggled materials, guitar strings, melted plastic, ink brewed from soot and toothpaste. The pain was intense, the precision real, the meaning always significant. Across prisons, from Russia's gulags to U.S. penitentiaries, tattoos became a hidden code. Every symbol told a story, and every placement held meaning. A spiderweb on the elbow meant time served. A teardrop by the eye could represent a life taken or one lost. 5 dots on the hand symbolized being trapped, 4 corners and 1 in the middle. In Soviet prisons, tattooing evolved into a complex system of rank and survival. A cathedral inked on the chest could represent years served, each dome a sentence. Stars on the shoulders marked a high-ranking inmate who commanded respect. But faking such status through ink could be deadly. These tattoos weren't just aesthetic, they were armor, credentials, warnings, or prayers. In the US, prison tattoos held similar weight, often tied to gangs, racial divisions, territory, and personal history. The tattoo machine was typically passed among inmates, the ink shared like contraband communion. For many, their first tattoo wasn't a decision, but a rite of passage. Outside the walls, this prison-born style started to influence the wider tattoo culture. Urban artists began incorporating its bold lines and stark imagery. What started as survival art became a recognized style, seen in tattoo parlors, films, and street culture. Yet stigma persisted. Tattoos, especially on the hands, neck, or face, often triggered judgment and closed opportunities. The ink could fade, but the assumptions lingered. Still, for those who wore them, these marks were never shameful. They were evidence of survival, of endurance, of identity written silently in skin. Because when no one hears your voice, your body tells the story. By the early 21st century, tattoos had transformed more than ever before, from sacred ritual to outlaw emblem to something entirely new, a canvas for the self. No longer hidden under sleeves or whispered about in disapproval, tattoos became proudly visible in fashion shows, corporate offices, and on social media. From baristas to executives, kindergarten teachers to military veterans, ink was no longer about defiance but declaration. Tattoo studios evolved with this shift. Many moved beyond back-alley shops with neon signs and became curated spaces of creativity, resembling art galleries. Tattoo artists rose to fame, building portfolios, attracting waitlists, and earning loyal clients who traveled just to be inked by them. Styles diversified: watercolor, fine line, minimalism, hyperrealism, sacred geometry, cultural revival, and full-body narratives. Technology advanced too: quieter machines, finer needles, safer ink, and faster healing. But under all the aesthetic progress, the reasons remained the same. People still came for memory, mourning, empowerment, or transformation. Some tattoos marked new beginnings or honored endings. Others concealed scars, physical or emotional. Some commemorated escape from abuse. Some honored ancestors. Some expressed survival through symbols when words failed. And yes, some simply loved frogs in cowboy hats. There's space for joy, too. Around the world, indigenous tattoo practices began to re-emerge. Maori tamoko, Inuit skin stitching, and Filipino batok, ancient styles once suppressed, returned with pride. Younger generations revived these traditions, tracing their heritage through ink. Still, discussions continued about cultural appropriation, commercialization, and whether the sacred could survive popularity. But perhaps that tension is the point. Tattoos have always existed in the space between pain and pride, permanence and change, the person we are and the one we aim to be. So we return to where we started. Ink to skin, a story told wordlessly, a mark made not to please, but to reveal. In the timeless language of tattoos, that has always been enough. The story of the space race didn't start with rockets or dreams, it began with war. After World War II, the world lay in ruins. Cities had crumbled, borders were redrawn, and two dominant powers emerged: the United States and the Soviet Union. Former allies now stood on opposite ideological sides: capitalism versus communism, democracy versus dictatorship. From the wreckage of Nazi Germany, both powers raced to capture the same prize: scientists. Werner von Braun, the mind behind the V-2 rocket, was quietly brought to the US under Operation Paperclip. The Soviets also seized scientists and research. The spoils of war now included rocket blueprints and the brains to build them. The Cold War began not with gunfire, but with mistrust and quiet competition. Each side rushed to develop more than bombs. They needed the means to deliver them. Intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, became the new symbol of dominance, capable of carrying nuclear warheads across oceans. But soon the question shifted. What if we aimed these rockets towards space instead? Space became the next arena, not of discovery, but of control. This wasn't just science, it was strategy. The first to space would claim global prestige and moral superiority. For the Soviets, still recovering from devastation, it was a chance to prove resilience. For the US, it was about pride and security. To fall behind wasn't just to lose, it was to risk everything. So both nations turned their eyes skyward, not with wonder, but urgency. Rockets became ladders to power, and above the earth, a new kind of race began. Not just of machines, but of meaning. On October 4th, 1957, under a clear sky, everything changed, not with an explosion, but a signal. From Kazakhstan's empty steppe, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1, a small metallic sphere into orbit. Roughly the size of a beach ball, weighing less than 200 pounds and outfitted with 4 antennas, Sputnik had no camera or crew, only a transmitter emitting steady beeps as it orbited Earth every 96 minutes. But those beeps echoed across the planet. For the Soviets, Sputnik marked victory, the first man-made satellite in space, proof their rockets worked, proof they were ahead. For Americans, it was a shock, a shiny alarm bell. If the Soviets could send a satellite up, could they send a missile down? Fear spread in the US. Schools held duck-and-cover drills. Newspapers warned of a new red moon. People looked skyward, wondering, are they watching us? Sputnik wasn't just a satellite, it was a message. The USSR had claimed the first milestone in space, and now the race was real, fueled by politics, pride, and panic. President Eisenhower urged calm, insisting the US wasn't falling behind. But behind closed doors, urgency mounted. Budgets for science soared. NASA was created within a year. Children were now pushed to study physics and math, not just for careers, but to protect national ideals. Then came Sputnik 2, launched just a month later, carrying Laika, a stray dog from Moscow, into orbit. She was the first living being to circle the planet. She didn't survive, but the message was loud. The Soviets weren't just winning, they were accelerating. For the first time, humans had sent something, someone, into space. And now, the race had truly begun. Sputnik's impact was profound. In American homes, schools, and government offices, reality sank in. The US had been beaten to space, not by a wealthier country, but by one rebuilding from war. The question wasn't only how, it was what comes next. The answer came fast. In 1958, the United States formed NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Built from existing agencies, NASA wasn't just a bureau, it was a commitment, a national promise that America wouldn't just catch up, it would lead. Explorer 1, the first US satellite, launched on January 31st, 1958, 4 months after Sputnik. But it carried more than a transmitter. It discovered the Van Allen radiation belts, showing the US wasn't just competing, it was contributing to science. The space race had become a national mission. TV shows taught kids about rockets. Schools added aerospace to lesson plans. Funding for science and engineering exploded. American identity now stretched beyond Earth. Yet politics steered every launch. Space was no longer neutral ground. It was a new battlefield for influence and defense. Control of space meant control of global communications and strategic power. The US feared losing influence, especially in newly independent nations choosing between Western democracy and Soviet communism. Enter Project Mercury, the first American human spaceflight program. 7 test pilots were selected, soon known as the Mercury 7. They trained rigorously, undergoing grueling physical and mental tests. They weren't just astronauts, they were symbols of ambition, of courage, and of America's place in the stars, and they were celebrated as heroes before a single foot left Earth. Meanwhile, the Soviets prepared to raise the bar. Satellites were just the start. Their next objective was clear: send a human into space and bring them back. For the US, this challenge was no longer theoretical. It was real, personal, urgent. It was only a matter of time before someone, Soviet or American, would risk everything to cross that invisible boundary between Earth and beyond. On April 12, 1961, just after sunrise in the Kazakh desert, a sleek silver rocket stood poised, silent, ready to rewrite history. Inside sat 27-year-old Soviet pilot Yuri Gagarin. Calm and smiling in his orange suit and white helmet, he looked more like an experimental pilot than a trailblazer. At 9:07 a.m. Moscow time, Vostok 1 thundered off the pad. Gagarin's voice crackled over the radio with a single word that would resonate globally. Poyakali! Let's go! With that, he became the first human in space. His 108-minute flight completed one full orbit, peaking at 187 miles altitude and speeding over 17,000 mph. He gazed down at our planet, the blue curve, the black void, no borders, and later spoke in awe, "Earth is blue, how beautiful, it is amazing." But this moment went beyond human triumph. It was a geopolitical shock. After Sputnik and Laika, the Soviets had done it again. A man in space and safely back. Gagarin dominated every headline, paraded as the emblem of socialist strength and technological prowess. The US reeled, scrambling to respond. President Kennedy, just months into office, now faced immense pressure to match and surpass this Soviet milestone. Gagarin re-entered Earth in a field, startling a farmer and her daughter. He calmly told, "I have come from space." He never flew again, yet his name was immortalized. That day, humanity crossed a boundary once only envisioned. We were no longer bound to Earth. One man, one orbit, and the space race entered its most human chapter. Just weeks later, the United States, though reeling, refused defeat. The Soviets had won the first round of human spaceflight, but America had its plan. Alan Shepard. On May 5, 1961, Shepard, a Navy test pilot, climbed into Mercury Redstone 3, nicknamed Freedom 7. His mission wasn't orbital. It was a suborbital hop, a critical demonstration that the US could send a human into space and bring them back. At 9:34 a.m., the rocket roared to life. Shepard ascended to 116 miles above Earth. He floated weightless, took in the planet's blue beauty, though only for a few minutes. Then came the sharp descent. He splashed down in the Atlantic and was swiftly recovered by a Navy ship. As he emerged from his capsule, he was hailed as the first American in space. Shepard's flight lacked Gagarin's distance or duration, but it proved something vital. The US could launch a human into space and return them alive. It signaled that America was firmly in the race. That short voyage was a significant leap toward the moon. With Shepard's success, NASA ramped up. The Mercury program set the stage for Gemini and Apollo. Now, the goal wasn't just to reach space, it was to stay longer and go further. Could America reach the moon? The bridge between Mercury and Apollo was the Gemini program. Launched in Daishu, 1965, Gemini tested the limits. It was bigger, bolder, more ambitious. The spacecraft doubled in size and carried 2 astronauts. On March 23, 1965, Gemini 3 took Virgil, Gus Grissom and John Young into orbit. Though only a 5-hour flight, it proved 2 astronauts could coexist in space, pilot the craft, and manage life support systems. Gemini missions grew in complexity. Gemini 4 in June 1965 featured Ed White's 23-minute spacewalk, the first American EVA, showing astronauts could work outside their vehicle, an essential step for lunar missions. Gemini introduced orbital rendezvous and docking, skills critical for Apollo. By Gemini 12's final mission in November 1966, the US was ready for the moon. The Soviets, though still competitive, offered little in comparison. The stage was set. The race to the moon was heating up. In 1961, President Kennedy, spurred by Cold War rivalry and space ambition, made a bold pledge before Congress to land a man on the moon by decade's end. The mission had evolved, no longer just reaching space, but heading to the moon and returning home. Thus began Apollo, NASA's lunar program. Its aim was unprecedented: send astronauts to the moon, land them, and bring them back. It was America's full-force answer to Soviet achievements and dominance. Apollo's first mission, Apollo 1, ended in tragedy. On January 27, 1967, a cabin fire during a ground test killed Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger B. Chaffee. The loss was devastating, but it forced major changes, overhauling safety protocols and equipment. Undeterred, Apollo pushed forward. In 1968, Apollo 8 orbited the moon, carrying Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and William Anders. They became the first humans to see the lunar far side, and they witnessed Earth rising above the moon's horizon, an image that captivated the world and marked a major milestone. Yet the principal goal remained. All eyes turned to Apollo 11. Amid Cold War tension, the U.S. was determined to reach the moon first. On July 20, 1969, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin made history. As Armstrong stepped onto the lunar surface, he said, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." America had done it. The moon was now a place humans had walked, a new frontier reached. The space race was won, but humanity's journey had only begun. On that day, Armstrong's step fulfilled Kennedy's promise and echoed as both a national achievement and a global triumph. But questions remained. What next? NASA's immediate focus was to complete Apollo. From 1969 to 1972, 5 more successful moon landings followed. Astronauts explored different regions, ran experiments, and brought back lunar samples, expanding understanding and pushing humanity's reach into the cosmos that would reveal insights into the moon's origin. Each mission reaffirmed the United States as the unquestioned leader in space exploration. However, the Apollo program, though triumphant, incurred immense financial costs and risked human lives. It absorbed vast resources and attention. By the early 1970s, political backing for further lunar missions waned. The Cold War persisted, but the urgency to surpass the Soviet Union in space diminished. Consequently, after Apollo 17 in 1972, the program was abruptly terminated. The focus of space efforts shifted. In 1973, Skylab launched as America's first space station. Astronauts lived and worked in microgravity, conducting experiments over extended missions. Skylab proved that humans could reside in space long-term, paving the way for future stations and deep space efforts. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union, despite early triumphs, began scaling back its space program. Though it achieved the first human spaceflight, it never landed on the moon. Having lost the race, the USSR continued unmanned missions to Venus and Mars and developed the Salyut Station series. These efforts culminated in Mir, a sprawling orbital research station symbolizing Soviet ambition in space. The Space Shuttle program then defined the next era. Launched in 1981, the shuttle was reusable, promising regular crew and cargo missions to low Earth orbit and enabling the construction of the International Space Station, ISS. Early flights were challenging, and the Challenger disaster in 1986 tragically highlighted the inherent dangers. Still, exploration pressed forward, fueled by collective curiosity and ambition. With the Cold War ending, the era dominated by government agencies and rivalry transitioned into one of private enterprise and global partnership. In the 1990s, the ISS emerged. Launched in 1998, it represented an unprecedented collaboration between the US, Russia, Canada, Japan, and Europe. As Earth orbited at over 17,000 mph, this station stood as a testament to shared scientific pursuit, transcending national competition. Today, the ISS remains a vital hub for international cooperation, research, and technological advancement. It also set the stage for privatized space exploration. Enter SpaceX, founded by Elon Musk in 2002. Musk aimed to cut space travel costs and enable human colonization, particularly Mars. SpaceX's reusable rockets revolutionized spaceflight. In 2012, its Dragon capsule became the first privately built spacecraft to deliver cargo to the ISS, and in 2020, Crew Dragon ferried astronauts to the station, marking the first American crewed launch from US soil since the shuttle's retirement. Other private companies like Blue Origin, founded by Jeff Bezos, and Virgin Galactic, led by Richard Branson, have made advances in suborbital tourism and research. These ventures are reshaping the industry and making space more accessible to civilians. The horizon now includes lunar bases, crewed Mars missions, and commercial orbital stations. SpaceX's Starship achieved successful deep space test flights. In 2021, NASA's Artemis lunar program, in partnership with private firms, plans to return humans to the moon and establish sustainable presence in this decade. What began as a domain for superpowers is now open to nations and private actors. Worldwide, the dream of exploring Mars and settling other planets is becoming reality. The next ambitious leap reminiscent of the old space race, and once again, the stars are calling. In Egypt's sun-drenched desert, beneath the blazing sky and golden sands lies a forgotten marvel, an underground wonder, once more impressive than Giza's pyramids, according to the historian Herodotus. Known as the Labyrinth, this vast structure extended deep beneath the earth and Egyptian monuments, a marvel of ancient engineering and design. Herodotus, who traveled through Egypt in the 5th century BC, described it as an extraordinary complex of vast chambers, elaborate corridors, and towering walls, surpassing any known structure of its era. It consisted of 12 immense courtyards, enclosed by lofty stone walls. Inside, chambers held statues, carvings, and inscriptions depicting gods and pharaohs, along with hidden chambers and passages. Herodotus emphasized that the sheer size made it impossible to explore fully in one visit. He compared its grandeur to that of the pyramids. Over time, this remarkable site vanished beneath shifting sands. The labyrinth became legend, buried and forgotten. Archaeologists and scholars continue the search today, hoping to uncover its secrets and reconstruct this architectural marvel. Herodotus portrayed the structure as a feat that pushed human ingenuity, a sprawling network of chambers large enough to host village-sized enclaves. He noted dozens of statues, some lifelike, representing gods and pharaohs, including a colossal Osiris statue dominating a central chamber, embodying divine presence. The layout was designed to bewilder, a true labyrinth in form and function, impossible to navigate in a single exploration. Herodotus concluded it was a lasting wonder, yet its location is still unknown. Legend places it near Lake Moeris, an ancient man-made lake near the Fayum oasis, about 60 miles south of modern-day Cairo. Built around 1800 BCE during the 12th dynasty under Amenemhat II, this temple complex may have honored Sobek, the crocodile god tied to the Nile's rhythms. 19th century British expeditions in Fayum uncovered large rectangular stone ruins, but no definitive evidence of the labyrinth. More recently, satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and drones have offered new hope. Researchers suggest remnants may lie beneath unexplored ruins near the oasis, though its exact location remains elusive. The lost labyrinth continues to tempt explorers, scholars, and treasure hunters, raising questions not only of its whereabouts, but of what treasures or knowledge it may conceal. This subterranean labyrinth was not merely an architectural feat, it was part of a larger spiritual landscape. To understand its importance, one must consider Egypt's other great wonders, like the Great Pyramid, built for Khufu, a testament to religious and architectural mastery. While pyramids symbolized royal burial and the afterlife, the labyrinth likely served different symbolic purposes, perhaps as a temple honoring cosmic forces and multiple deities. Today, its rediscovery could transform our understanding of ancient Egypt's spiritual and architectural sophistication, a reminder that the sands still guard mysteries yet to be revealed that governed life, death, and rebirth. Like the pyramids, the labyrinth's design may have been linked to Egyptian cosmology. The ancient Egyptians believed in a multi-layered universe that interwove the material and spiritual realms. With its sprawling corridors and hidden chambers, the labyrinth might have symbolized the soul's journey in the afterlife. Much like the pyramids, designed as tombs to ease the pharaoh's transition, the labyrinth appears to be more than an engineering marvel. It could be a symbolic portrayal of life's profound enigmas. Some researchers even argue the labyrinth served a ritualistic purpose, where initiates would undergo trials and spiritual transformation within its corridors, reflecting a soul's voyage through the underworld and toward divine enlightenment, echoing the spiritual symbolism of the pyramids. Herodotus himself described the labyrinth as having a passage system as intricate as that of the pyramids, hinting at a shared symbolic goal, guiding both the living and the dead through spaces that blurred earthly and otherworldly boundaries. Although the precise link between the labyrinth and pyramids is unclear, both structures reflect ancient Egypt's grand ambition, a civilization deeply engaged with cosmic mysteries beyond the physical world. The lost labyrinth was not merely practical, like a palace or market. It was shrouded in sacred mystery. Its complex layout and scale hint at deeper purposes beyond architecture. Many theorize that it was a consecrated place, hosting religious ceremonies. Perhaps a temple complex devoted to several gods, reflecting the Egyptians' religious devotion and their monument's spiritual symbolism, touching on afterlife, cosmic order, and the soul's journey. One compelling idea is that the labyrinth symbolized the afterlife itself. In Egyptian belief, the soul's path to eternity was full of hazards. The labyrinth's maze-like structure and secret chambers could represent these tests and obstacles, mirroring the underworld trials supported by deities and faith. The labyrinth may also have been a ritual space where priests and initiates undertook spiritual challenges. It is speculated to have been the site of mystery schools that passed sacred teachings to chosen individuals. These initiates might have navigated the labyrinth in a ritual mirroring spiritual enlightenment. Such a physical maze, representing a soul's passage, would link the tangible and spiritual realms firmly within Egyptian views of life, death, and rebirth. Another theory suggests astronomical alignment. The Egyptians studied stars and celestial movements closely, essential for their agricultural calendar and religious rituals. The labyrinth may have been aligned with stars or sun paths, its corridors and chambers mapped to night sky patterns, symbolically reflecting the soul's cosmic voyage. Regardless of its actual function, the lost labyrinth remains a mystery. Its symbolism, enigmas, and deep connection to Egyptian worldview continue to entice modern seekers. For centuries, this labyrinth has stayed buried beneath Egypt's sands, yet curiosity about it endures. Archaeologists, historians, and explorers continue the search, hoping modern technology will uncover its truths. Early expeditions, especially in the 19th century around the Fayum Oasis and Lake Moris, points mentioned by Herodotus, found only scattered ruins, too ambiguous to identify the labyrinth. In the 20th and 21st centuries, new momentum emerged. thanks to satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and advanced excavation. Aerial surveys and satellite scans over the desert areas thought to host the labyrinth have revealed possible hidden stone structures, perhaps remnants of Herodotus's labyrinth. The region near Lake Moeris and the Fayum Oasis, tied to the ancient city of Crocodilopolis, remains a leading candidate. Archaeologists have found some ancient foundations and building fragments there, but no conclusive signs. More recently, reports of underwater ruins in Lake Moeris have renewed interest. Some experts think parts of the labyrinth may lie submerged, buried under centuries of sediment. Others speculate it could be hidden under sand dunes near ancient urban centers or temple remains. Despite progress, the labyrinth remains undiscovered. Yet each new scan and excavation brings renewed hope that it may one day re-emerge to reveal its secrets. The sands may conceal more than a forgotten edifice. They might hold keys to unraveling the spiritual and architectural brilliance of one of history's great civilizations. The search for the lost labyrinth is more than archaeology. It's the pursuit of a hidden chapter of Egypt's story, one that could significantly change our understanding of the ancient world. Finding the labyrinth would offer unprecedented insights into Egyptian architecture, religion, and daily life. Its vast complexity hints at advanced engineering that may have shaped later monumental structures like the pyramids and temples. The labyrinth could inform us about social and political organization too. Was it built under a single pharaoh's decree or through collective effort across many groups? Its discovery wouldn't merely add to Egyptology, it would transform it, revealing new perspectives on ancient Egyptian civilization and its global heritage. For now, the labyrinth remains, concealed, a shadow beneath the sands, but each new clue brings its possible reappearance closer. The ancient world's mysteries still beckon, and the lost labyrinth may one day emerge to share its story. Throughout history, Egypt's labyrinth has resonated as more than mere architecture. Its symbolism is woven into Egyptian culture, influencing not only ancient myths but stories of later civilizations. Even without physical remains, the labyrinth concept continues to fascinate, symbolizing the soul's journey in Egyptian cosmology. Maze-like by design, the labyrinth likely mirrored the arduous path a soul must take to reach eternal life. In the Egyptian cosmology, the afterlife teemed with trials and mysteries that only the deserving could navigate. The labyrinth's twisting passages may have symbolized this spiritual struggle. Its cultural role may also connect to the worship of Sobek, the crocodile god, whose temples dotted the Fayum region. Sobek embodied both creation and destruction, a duality reflected in a maze that could guide but also mislead. The labyrinth's hidden secrets and guarded corridors might embody the divine's nurturing yet fearsome nature. But Egypt's labyrinth legacy didn't end there. Over centuries, the concept spread to other cultures, forever shaping the idea of labyrinths in art, architecture, and myth far beyond the Nile. One of the most well-known legends is the story of the Labyrinth of Crete, designed by the famed craftsman Daedalus. In Greek mythology, the labyrinth was created to confine the Minotaur, a creature with the body of a man and the head of a bull. Unlike its Egyptian counterpart, the Greek labyrinth symbolized confusion and entrapment, a place where those who entered could be doomed to lose their way forever. Over the centuries, the idea of the labyrinth has evolved, taking on new interpretations across different cultures. In medieval Europe, it became a representation of the spiritual journey. Labyrinths were often built into cathedral floors, where walking their complex paths became an act of prayer and contemplation. Pilgrims would follow these winding routes as a metaphor for their own path toward redemption. The concept of the labyrinth as a sacred space, one requiring both intellect and bravery to navigate, crossed cultural and geographic boundaries. It came to symbolize the universal human pursuit of understanding, truth, and spiritual awakening. Its associations with both life and death, as well as with inner challenges, secured its place as a timeless metaphor for the soul's search for purpose. Whether in ancient Egypt, Greece, or later religious practices, the labyrinth has remained a compelling symbol of human complexity and introspection. Though the fabled labyrinth of Egypt still lies buried beneath layers of sand, its symbolic significance continues to resonate and inspire. It serves as a reminder that some enigmas, though hidden, endure, waiting to be uncovered when we are prepared to grasp their full meaning. The search for Egypt's lost labyrinth is far from over. Each year, technological advancements bring us a step closer to revealing its secrets. Despite its centuries-long elusiveness, the labyrinth continues to fuel the imagination of archaeologists and adventurers, drawing renewed interest to the mystery of this ancient structure. Today, exploration is centered around the region near Lake Moeris and the Fayum oasis. Many scholars suspect that the labyrinth may be buried near the ancient city of Crocodilopolis, once a bustling center that housed a temple dedicated to Sobek, the crocodile deity. This area remains a key focus due to historical accounts, including those by Herodotus, which link it to the labyrinth. In recent years, cutting-edge technologies have revitalized the search. Satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar, GPR, have allowed experts to scan terrain previously inaccessible or overlooked, offering fresh clues about what lies beneath. These tools have helped identify traces of hidden structures, even those concealed under deep layers of sand. A significant development came in 2017 when an aerial survey over the Fayum oasis detected anomalies in the landscape. Large rectangular shapes that may indicate buried ruins or ancient walls, potentially aligning with the labyrinth's location. While these findings are encouraging, much of the site remains out of reach, and the ever-changing desert landscape continues to hide what may still lie beneath. Some researchers suggest that parts of the labyrinth could now be submerged under Lake Moeris, which has altered its shape dramatically over time. The possibility that sections of the structure rest beneath the water adds a new layer of hope for those who believe it remains intact, awaiting the moment when it can finally be brought to light.